They fined me for building a fortress in my backyard, but when the sirens screamed, they were the first ones begging to get inside. I used to believe in the quiet. 7 years ago, a different kind of wind took my Sarah. I can still feel the ghost of her hand in mine, the way she'd squeeze my fingers whenever thunder rumbled in the distance. She had this sixth sense about weather, a deep knowing that went beyond any forecast. The morning it happened, the air felt charged, electric with a tension I was too stubborn to recognize. She stood by the kitchen window, her coffee cooling, and told me she had a bad feeling. A knot in her stomach, she said. I kissed her forehead and told her not to worry. The sun was shining. The birds were singing. It was just another beautiful day and more. I was a structural engineer. I believed in what I could calculate, what I could see and test. I didn't put much stock in feelings. That was my first and greatest miscalculation. The alerts came too late. By the time the sirens wailed, it was already upon us. The world dissolved into a nightmare of screaming wind and splintering wood. Our home, the place I had sworn was safe, came apart around us like a house of cards. I remember the deafening roar, the pressure drop that made my ears pop, and then the unthinkable force that tore her from my grasp. I woke up pinned under a beam, the world silent except for the drip of water and the distant cry of sirens. It took them a day to find me. They never found Sarah alive. I pulled her lifeless body from the rubble myself. My hands, trained to build and reinforce, were useless. They could only dig and clutch and mourn. The grief was a storm of its own, one that never truly passed. It just settled into my bones, a permanent low-pressure system in my soul. I left more. I sold the vacant lot that was once our home, packed a single suitcase with our photo albums and the dog tags I'd kept from my service, and I drove until the landscape changed. I ended up in Crestwood Meadows, a community so meticulously planned, so obsessively ordered, that it felt like another planet. Every blade of grass was identical. Every mailbox was the same shade of matte black. It was a place where you could almost convince yourself that chaos didn't exist, that nature was something you controlled with a sprinkler system and a landscaping crew. But I knew better. The first thing I did, even before I'd unpacked my clothes, was to stake out the plot in my backyard. I knew the codes, the soil composition, the wind patterns of this new region. My 24 years with the Army Corps of Engineers hadn't just taught me how to build, they taught me how to anticipate failure. And I had failed once. I would not fail again. The design was in my head, refined by loss. 6 feet below the pristine surface, a chamber of reinforced concrete a foot thick. Rebar woven into a steel tapestry that could shrug off the fury of an EF-5. The door was a masterpiece of engineering, a solid steel slab with reinforced locking bolts, tested to withstand pressures that would flatten a school bus. It wasn't pretty. It was a scar on the perfect skin of Crestwood Meadows, a reminder of a wound that never healed. And it was my promise to the memory of my wife. The construction took 2 weeks. The backhoe's growl was a foreign sound in that quiet neighborhood. Neighbors watched from behind their curtains. Dave, from 3 houses down, finally ambled over, a sweating glass of lemonade in his hand. "Whoa, there's Sam. Going full Fortress America on us?" he joked, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. I looked at him, my face a mask. "I've seen what happens when you don't have one," I said, my voice flat. The smile melted from his face. He mumbled something and retreated back to his perfectly curated domain. I didn't care. Their judgment was a feather on the scale against the weight of my memory. For a few months, there was an uneasy peace. I tried to assimilate. I waved at people during my evening walks. I attended one of the neighborhood potlucks, standing awkwardly with a paper plate of pasta salad. I made small talk about property taxes and the new community garden. But I always felt their eyes on me, sensed the whispers that trailed in my wake. There was an undercurrent of disapproval, a cheerful hostility that is unique to places where conformity is the highest virtue. The first official missive arrived 3 weeks after the concrete had cured. It was hand-delivered, a thick, cream-colored envelope with the embossed Crestwood Meadows Association logo, a stylized songbird in a perfect circle. The language was dry, bureaucratic, and utterly devoid of humanity. Dear Mr. Samuel Croft, it began. The recent installation of a subsurface unit on your property contravenes Article 4, Section C of our Community Aesthetic Guidelines. The visible access point and ventilation pipe are not in keeping with the unified visual character of our neighborhood. You are required to remediate or fully conceal this installation within 10 business days. Remediate, as if it were a toxic spill. There was no mention of its purpose, no acknowledgement of the safety it represented. It was simply an aesthetic problem to be solved. I called the number listed. A polished voicemail greeted me. You've reached the office of Patricia Wells, CMA President. Please leave a detailed message regarding the nature of your inquiry, and we will respond in the order it was received. Her voice was like chilled steel. I left a calm, reasoned message explaining the shelter was fully permitted by the city, met all FEMA and state codes, and was a legally installed safety structure. I followed up with an email attaching the PDFs of the permits and my engineering schematics. A week later, the second letter came. Your correspondence has been reviewed and noted. However, municipal approval does not supersede the community covenants you agreed to upon purchase. Persistent noncompliance will result in financial penalties being assessed to your account. The gloves were off. The tension was no longer a subtle hum, it was a taut wire. It was Carol who made it personal. Her garden was a riot of color, every rose bush pruned into submission, every blossom a testament to controlled nature. She approached me one Saturday as I was weeding a small, pathetic flower bed I'd tried to start. She held a tumbler with her initials engraved on it. You really should consider taking that thing down, Samuel, she said, her voice syrupy with false concern. It makes people uncomfortable. It suggests our community isn't safe. I stopped my work and looked at her. So preparing for a threat makes you feel threatened? She gave me a patient, condescending smile. It's simply not the Crestwood way. We project an image of peace and stability. That night, I sat on the top step of my shelter, the heavy door open behind me. The air inside smelled of cool concrete and determination. I wasn't angry at Carol. She was a product of her environment, a woman who believed that if you manicured the surface enough, the depths couldn't hurt you. But I understood then that the HOA's fight wasn't with a structure. It was with a symbol. I had built a monument to chaos in their garden of order. I had reminded them that they were not in control, and for that, I had to be punished. An old instinct, honed in my military years, kicked in. I started a file. A thick, blue 3-ring binder. Every notice, every email printout, every scrawled message was dated, annotated, and slotted into a protective sleeve. I printed the Oklahoma Residential Storm Shelter Act, highlighting the sections that protected homeowners from HOA override. I compiled FEMA guidelines on safe room construction. I was building a fortress of paper to protect my fortress of concrete. I didn't want this war, but if they brought one, I would not be caught defenseless. Not again. Patricia Wells made her first personal appearance on a Thursday afternoon. I was in my driveway cleaning grass clippings from my mower when her silver SUV, sleek and silent, glided to a stop at my curb. The tinted window hummed down. Mr. Croft, she said. Her smile was a thin, practiced line. I'd like a word. She emerged from the vehicle, her heels making sharp, authoritative clicks on the asphalt. She wore a tailored pantsuit the color of a dusty rose, and she carried a leather folio like a shield. A younger man, Jason, I later learned, scrambled out of the passenger side, clutching a tablet as if it were a lifeline. We need to discuss the non-compliant installation in your rear yard, Patricia stated, not a question, but a declaration. She opened her folio and produced a laminated aerial photograph. This was taken during our most recent compliance drone flyover. I took the photo. From that angle, my shelter was nearly invisible, just a slight discoloration in the grass and the faint outline of the hatch. It's a storm shelter, I said, my voice calm. Fully permitted, engineered to survive an EF5 tornado. It poses no danger and violates no safety code. Jason snorted. What's legal downtown and what's acceptable here are two different things, Mr. Croft. This is about community standards. Patricia nodded in agreement, a single, sharp dip of her chin. It's a blight. It disrupts the visual harmony we work so hard to maintain. You mean the monotony? I asked. She didn't even blink. We are preserving property values for every homeowner in Crestwood Meadows. This shelter doesn't lower property values, I countered, feeling a familiar heat rising in my chest. But ignoring tornado season? That might. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She retrieved a manila folder from her folio and handed it to me. Inside was a formal violation notice, a copy of the complaint, and a summons to a mandatory compliance hearing before the full HOA board. It looked like a legal subpoena. Jason piped up, failure to appear will result in additional fines and potential liens on your property. A lien. They were threatening my home over a structure designed to save it. The absurdity was breathtaking. Do you have any idea what one of those storms can actually do? I asked, my voice dropping, becoming dangerously quiet. It's not just wind. It's a blender made of houses and cars. It turns lumber into spears and glass into shrapnel. Have you ever heard the sound a house makes when it's being unzipped from its foundation? Patricia's lips pressed into a bloodless line. We are not here for a lesson in dramatic meteorology, Mr. Croft. We are here to resolve a covenant breach. You have until the hearing to submit a plan for its removal or permanent concealment. She turned on her heel, a crisp military-grade pivot, and marched back to her SUV. Jason shot me a last, nervous glance before following. The Lexus pulled away, silent and smug. That weekend, the digital whispers became a roar. I rarely check the neighborhood social media app, but someone, perhaps thinking they were doing me a favor, printed out a thread and left it in my mailbox. A user named Concerned Crestwood Parent had posted, "Many of us are growing increasingly alarmed by the bunker-like structure behind Lot 42. While we all value personal safety, we must also protect the serene, family-friendly, and beautiful environment that makes Crestwood Meadows so special. I encourage everyone to attend the next board meeting to voice their opinions." Attached was a grainy, zoomed-in photo of my shelter hatch, the angle making it look ominous and out of place. I stared at the printout, the paper cool in my hands. This was their strategy. They weren't fighting me with facts, they were fighting me with perception. They were making my preparation seem paranoid, my caution seem threatening. The shelter was no longer just a shelter. In their eyes, it was becoming a symbol of me, and I was becoming the neighborhood menace. Carol came by again, her tumbler ever present. "I saw the post," she said, not even bothering with a greeting. "Are you really going to dig your heels in over this?" "The heels are already dug in," I replied, "about 6 feet deep." She let out a tight, humorless chuckle. "Look, Samuel, we all sympathize with what you've been through. We really do. But people choose Crestwood for its peace, its predictability." "There is nothing predictable about a supercell," I said, my patience wearing thin. She tilted her head, a bird-like gesture. "There's something inherently unsettling about a man who insists on building a fortress in the heart of suburbia. It sends the wrong message." And there it was. The final implication. I wasn't just a non-compliant homeowner, I was becoming the threat itself. I was the one who made them feel unsafe. The compliance hearing was held in the Crestwood Clubhouse, a building with floor-to-ceiling windows and expensive, uncomfortable furniture. The board sat at a long mahogany table on a raised dais, looking down on the residents. Patricia presided from the center, flanked by Jason and another board member with an impressively outdated mustache. The room was packed. I felt dozens of eyes on my back as I walked to the podium, my blue binder feeling both heavy and flimsy. I opened it. "The structure on my property is legal," I began, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. "It was inspected and approved by the city. It meets or exceeds every building, safety, and FEMA code. You have no legal jurisdiction over it." Patricia leaned forward, her hands steepled. "This hearing is not about legality, Mr. Croft. It is about community standards." "And what standard is that?" I asked, the words hanging in the air. "The one that prioritizes landscaping over human life?" Jason interrupted, his voice sharp. "Mr. Croft, please refrain from inflammatory language." "Inflammatory? You're worried about a pipe ruining your view? You should see what 200-mile-per-hour winds do to a roof truss. You should see what happens to a human body when the world falls on it." A collective gasp rippled through the room. I had broken the unspoken rule. I had mentioned real, visceral danger in this sanitized space. Patricia's face was a mask of cold fury. "This is your final warning. If the structure is not removed or brought into full aesthetic compliance within 14 days, we will pursue all available enforcement actions under Section 12 of the Covenant Agreement." I looked from her face to Jason's, to the rows of nervous, blank, or disapproving faces in the audience. "You would rather expose every single person in this room to potential death from a tornado than allow one man to build what every government agency recommends?" The silence that followed was absolute, thick, and heavy. Patricia broke it. "This hearing is adjourned." I packed my binder slowly, deliberately, and walked out. No one met my eye. That night, I stood beside the shelter, looking up at a sky full of stars. It was peaceful, but I could feel it in my bones, a shift in the air. The calm before the storm. The first fine arrived not in the mail, but slipped under my front door like a secret threat. It was printed on red-bordered paper. "Notice of daily violation penalty, $80 per day, beginning immediately." There was no signature, no contact name, just the cold, impersonal decree. By the end of the first week, the tally was over $500. They were constructing a wall of financial pressure, brick by brick, hoping to crush me into submission. I called the number on the notice. This time, a live person answered, a young woman whose voice was polished to a robotic sheen. "I'd like to appeal this fine," I said. "The appeals process requires submission through our internal online portal," she recited, as if reading from a screen. "I've already submitted all the documentation. The permits, the engineering plans. The structure is legal." "Yes, Mr. Croft," she replied, her tone perfectly pleasant, "but it violates community aesthetic guidelines. That is a separate category." I took a slow, deep breath, trying to keep my temper in check. "Are you aware that the state of Oklahoma has laws specifically protecting storm shelter installations from HOA override?" "I am only authorized to direct you to the online portal, sir," she said, her voice never wavering. I hung up. The sheer, maddening bureaucracy of it was a special kind of torture. The next morning, I found a bright yellow plastic sign staked into the center of my front lawn. "Attention, Lot 42, in violation." It was bold, garish, and designed for maximum public shaming. I wrenched it out of the ground and threw it into my trash can with a satisfying clatter. But the following day, it was back, this time secured to my mailbox post with heavy-duty zip ties. The message was clear: we can do this all day. So I started documenting everything. I filmed myself on my phone, calmly explaining the date and the reason for removing the sign. I photographed every fine notice. I saved every email. I began a private log noting dates, times, and quotes from interactions with neighbors. I didn't know how far they would go, but I would not be caught unprepared. Not again. It was my neighbor, Leo, who offered the first glimmer of solidarity. A retired Marine with a gruff demeanor and eyes that had seen too much, he knocked on my door one evening. "You holding up, Sam?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. I nodded, feeling a weariness I hadn't allowed myself to acknowledge. They're trying to bleed me out with fines. He scratched his salt and pepper beard. I've seen it before. In the Corps and out. Sometimes the paper pushers are more dangerous than the guys with guns. The cuts are smaller, but they bleed you just the same. I invited him in, and for the first time, I told someone in Crestwood the whole story. About Sarah. About the storm. About the promise I made to myself standing in the ruins of my old life. Leo listened not with pity, but with the understanding of a man who knew what it was to lose. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he clapped a hand on my shoulder. You keep that door strong, brother. If the big one ever comes, you can bet your ass I'll be knocking. On the 11th day of fines, I received a notice of intent to file lien. If I didn't pay the accumulated debt, now over $1,000, they would place a legal claim on my property. It was their nuclear option. I spent that afternoon at City Hall, my blue binder under my arm. I managed to get a meeting with David Chin, a senior planning official who looked overworked but had sharp, intelligent eyes. He flipped through my documents, nodding occasionally. Yep, he said finally, leaning back in his chair. This is all in perfect order. They have no jurisdictional leg to stand on. The Oklahoma Storm Shelter Act is very clear on this. He pulled out a piece of official city letterhead and began to write. I'm issuing a letter of confirmation. It states that your shelter is in full compliance with all municipal and state regulations. This should, in theory, put a stop to their nonsense. Theory? I asked. He gave me a wry smile. HOAs sometimes operate in their own little fiefdoms. They know they'll lose in a real court, but they'll fight you anyway, just to see if you'll break first. It's about the principle, even when the principle is wrong. I left his office with the signed letter, feeling a sliver of hope. That evening, I composed a final email to the HOA board. Subject: formal notice of compliance and cease and desist. I attached David Chen's letter and wrote, your continued pursuit of fines and legal threats constitutes harassment and a misrepresentation of your authority. Cease all actions immediately. Any further attempts to enforce unlawful penalties will be met with formal complaints to the state HOA Oversight Board and civil litigation. I hit send. The die was cast. 3 days later, I was woken by the sound of gravel crunching in my driveway. 2 men in Crestwood Meadows polo shirts were there, one holding a tablet, the other a measuring tape. What's this about? I asked, stepping onto the porch. We're verifying potential lot line encroachment, the taller one said, not making eye contact. You're measuring my backyard, I stated flatly. Just following the board's directive, the shorter one shrugged. I looked at the corner of my property. I knew exactly where the survey pins were. They would find nothing. This wasn't about boundaries, it was a message. A final, petty display of power. They were letting me know they were still watching, still in charge. But that afternoon, the sky began to tell a different story. It darkened not with the gentle approach of evening, but with a swift, sickly intensity. The air grew thick and heavy, the kind of humidity you can feel in your lungs. The barometric pressure dropped so suddenly it made my ears pop. A profound silence fell over the neighborhood. No bird song, no distant lawnmowers. Just a waiting stillness. I checked my weather radar. A cluster of cells was firing up to the west, but nothing alarming yet. But my gut, the same instinct I'd ignored 7 years ago, was screaming. I went out to the shelter. I checked the vents, the battery-powered lights, the emergency radio. I ran my hand over the cold steel of the door. It was ready. I was ready. I looked across the street at the HOA clubhouse, its large windows reflecting the ominous greenish sky. It was a beautiful building, a testament to aesthetics. But it had no basement, no safe room. It was a beautiful trap. The first alert chimed on my phone. A severe thunderstorm watch. Then, barely 30 minutes later, the watch escalated to a warning. And then, the word I'd been waiting for and dreading flashed on the screen. Tornado. The robotic voice on my NOAA radio crackled to life, emotionless and terrifying. Tornado warning for this area until 5:15 p.m. Doppler radar indicates rotation within the storm system. Take shelter immediately. The world outside erupted into chaos. The temperature plummeted. Wind, no longer a breeze but a gale, ripped at trees and sent patio furniture skittering across lawns. I saw my neighbors, those paragons of order, scrambling in panic. Carol was desperately trying to drag a ceramic pot twice her size toward her garage. People were screaming for their children, their pets. And through it all, I saw the lights still on in the clubhouse. The board was in there. Patricia, Jason, and a few others. Having an emergency meeting, I supposed. Discussing covenants and compliance while the sky turned hellish green above them. It was 4:20 p.m. when the clubhouse door finally burst open. It wasn't a calm exit. It was a rout. Jason was the first out, sprinting across the lawns toward my house, his tie flying over his shoulder. His face was a mask of pure, undiluted terror. "Samuel," he screamed, his voice cracking. "The windows. The clubhouse windows are bowing. Is there room? Patricia says we need to get in now." I walked out to meet him on the grass, the wind tearing at my clothes. "What happened to community standards, Jason?" I asked, my voice eerily calm amidst the din. "Please," he begged, his hands trembling. "There's no basement. There's nowhere to go. We didn't think, we never thought." I looked past him. A procession of figures was stumbling from the clubhouse. Patricia, her pristine blazer soaked and clinging to her hair a wild mess. Behind her came Carol, clutching her small dog, her face pale. Others followed, Mitch from the board, a couple of teenagers I recognized, an elderly woman being half-carried. All of them were running, stumbling, their eyes wide with a fear I knew all too well. "Open it!" Patricia shrieked as she neared, her composure utterly shattered. "For God's sake, let us in." I stood for a moment, a lifetime of grief and anger and defiance warring inside me. I looked at their faces, these people who had tried to destroy the very thing that could save them. I thought of the fines, the threats, the public shaming, the lien. Then the tornado siren, which had been a steady wail, changed pitch. It became a piercing, urgent scream. The wind roared, and the first shingles began to tear from rooftops, flying through the air like jagged leaves. There was no more time for deliberation. "Get in!" I roared over the hellish noise. I turned and ran to the shelter, wrenching the heavy steel door open. "Go! Move!" I yelled, helping them down the steep steps. Patricia fell through the opening first, then Jason, then Carol, shoving her dog into the darkness. The others poured in after them, a flood of desperate humanity. I saw Leo running across his yard, and I waved him over. He dove in without a word. I took one last look at the apocalyptic sky, at the funnel cloud now visible and churning in the near distance, and then I climbed down, pulling the heavy door shut behind me. The world outside vanished with a final, solid clang of the locking bolts. The roar became muffled, but no less terrifying. Inside it was chaos. 17 people were crammed into the dim, concrete space. A child was sobbing. Someone was hyperventilating. The air was thick with the smell of fear and damp earth. Patricia was crouched in a corner, her hands over her ears, rocking back and forth, whispering, "This can't be happening, this can't be happening." And then it hit. The sound was unlike anything I had ever experienced, even in my worst memories. It was a living, screaming entity, a freight train grinding the world to dust directly over our heads. The shelter shuddered with a deep, resonant thrum, a vibration that went straight to the bone. Dust rained down from the ceiling. The single fluorescent light flickered violently but held. A collective gasp, a prayer, a whimper rose from the huddled group. I watched their faces in the strobe-like light. These were the people who had signed petitions, who had voted for fines, who had called my life-saving refuge an eyesore and a blight. In that moment, their titles, their authority, their carefully constructed social hierarchy meant nothing. They were just animals, terrified of the dying of the light. And in their wide, horrified eyes, I saw the dawning, terrible understanding of what I had been trying to tell them all along. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt a profound, weary sorrow. Sorrow that it took the end of their world for them to see the truth. The maelstrom seemed to last forever. 37 minutes of unrelenting terror, of praying, of listening to the world being dismantled plank by plank above us. We heard the shriek of tearing metal, the explosive pop of shattering glass, the deep-throated groan of massive trees giving way. And then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The roar receded, fading into a distant, menacing rumble, and then into an unnerving, absolute silence. No one moved. No one spoke. The only sound was the ragged breathing of 17 people who had just stared into the abyss. Slowly, I reached up and unlatched the heavy door. I pushed it open, and a shaft of dull, gray light spilled into the shelter, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The world we emerged into was unrecognizable. It was a landscape of raw, brutalized earth. The street was littered with the entrails of homes. Insulation, shattered drywall, splintered furniture. Trees were stripped bare, their limbs snapped like twigs. Power lines lay in tangled, deadly snakes across the roads. And the Crestwood Meadows clubhouse was simply gone. Where it once stood was a vacant concrete slab, scoured clean, with a few twisted steel beams poking out like broken ribs. The symbol of their control had been erased without a trace. Patricia walked slowly toward the empty space, her steps unsteady. She stopped at the edge of the slab and just stared, her hands hanging limp at her sides. Carol had sunk to her knees in the mud, her dog clutched to her chest, weeping silently. No one said, "I told you so." The devastation said it for us. The aftermath was a blur of flashing lights and stunned activity. First responders arrived. News vans trundled down the broken streets. A FEMA team I recognized from my old life was already assessing the damage. One of them, a guy named Ray, spotted me. "Sam? No way. I heard you retired to some quiet suburb," he said, his eyes wide as he took in the scene. "I thought I did," I replied, my voice hoarse. He looked at the shelter, then at the group of shell-shocked people milling around it. "You built that?" I nodded. He let out a low whistle. "Damn good thing you did. Preliminary assessment is EF for damage here. This neighborhood, a lot of people are going to be listing this address on paperwork for years to come." He clapped me on the shoulder. "These people are lucky to have you." I didn't feel lucky. I felt hollowed out. The news crew found us. A reporter with perfectly coiffed hair shoved a microphone in Patricia's face. She had tried to smooth her hair, to reassemble her persona. "Thankfully," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "our community had access to a privately built safety shelter thanks to the foresight of one of our residents." There was no mention of the war she had waged against it. She was trying to rebrand the narrative, to paint herself as part of a prudent community. The reporter then turned to me. "And you're the man who built it? What made you do it?" I looked directly into the camera lens. "They tried to have me tear it down," I said, my words clear and flat. The silence that followed was deeper than the one after the storm. The truth, once spoken, could not be unspoken. The backlash was swift and merciless. The violation notices, the social media posts, the photos of the yellow sign on my lawn, it all leaked online. The court of public opinion delivered a verdict far harsher than any HOA hearing. The Crestwood Meadows HOA Facebook page was inundated with fury and scorn before it was hastily taken down. But their retreat was not surrender. A few days after the storm, I received another certified letter, this time from the HOA's attorney. It spoke of a temporary moratorium on enforcement, but carefully noted that my shelter was still considered in violation of design covenants. They were clinging to the last shred of their authority, trying to save face in the ruins. That's when I decided to end it for good. I took David Chen's letter, the photos of the devastation, and the evidence of their vent tampering, and I filed a formal complaint with the state HOA Oversight Board. I also called a civil rights attorney. We met, and she reviewed the entire saga. "This is more than overreach," she said, tapping her pen on the stack of paper. "The attempted sabotage of the air vent moves this into the realm of criminal negligence. You have a very strong case." "I don't want money," I told her. "I want to make sure they can never do this to anyone else." Patricia Wells resigned shortly after being served with papers from the sheriff's department regarding the vent tampering investigation. The remaining board, shell-shocked and leaderless, offered me a formal, public apology. I declined it. An apology wouldn't change the bylaws. Instead, I agreed to consult on the drafting of a new community safety policy. Not as a board member, but as the one who had been right. The clause I wrote was simple, direct, and ironclad. No rule, covenant, or action by the Crestwood Meadows Association shall obstruct, penalize, or interfere with the installation, maintenance, or operation of any storm shelter that meets or exceeds FEMA and state safety standards. Obstructing access or ventilation to any such shelter will be considered a criminal matter and pursued as such. It passed by unanimous vote. At a community gathering held in what was left of the park, Leo called me up to speak. I stood before my neighbors, people who had once seen me as a problem. The anger was gone, replaced by a weary resolve. "I built that shelter," I began, my voice carrying in the quiet, "because I lost the person I loved most in the world to a storm. I made a promise to myself that I would never be powerless in the face of the sky again. Some of you fought me. You called it an eyesore. You fined me. You threatened my home." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. "But when the wind screamed and the world fell apart, that shelter didn't ask for your vote. It didn't check your opinion of it. It did the one job it was built for. It protected you. It gave you a tomorrow. Let's rebuild, but let's rebuild smarter. Let's listen to the people who see the danger on the horizon, not silence them. Because the sky doesn't care about our rules. It doesn't care about our property values. It only respects preparation." I stepped down. There was a moment of silence, and then Leo started to clap. Slowly, others joined in. It wasn't a roaring ovation, but it was respectful. It was real. Later, Patricia came to my door one last time. She was dressed in simple jeans and a sweatshirt, a world away from the power-suited president she had been. She held a water-stained binder. "I believe this belongs to you," she said softly, her eyes downcast. It was her copy of the violation file against me. "I thought I was protecting something," she whispered. "I was wrong. I took the binder." "You are now," I said. She nodded once, turned, and walked away. I didn't burn the binder. I took it out back and buried it deep at the edge of my property, beneath the one oak tree that had withstood the storm. Some things don't need to be destroyed by fire. They just need to be returned to the earth and forgotten. Crestwood Meadows was rebuilt, but it was never the same. The obsessive, fearful perfection was washed away by the storm. In its place grew a quieter, more resilient community. We formed a real neighborhood watch, one focused on safety and looking out for one another, not on the color of someone's shutters. My shelter, once a symbol of conflict, became a quiet landmark. People would sometimes walk by and rest a hand on its solid steel door, a silent acknowledgement of the safety it represented. The kids in the neighborhood even gave it a name. They called it the heartbeat. A year later, the city gave Crestwood Meadows an award for community resilience. A FEMA official handed me a certificate and said, "We need more people like you." But he was wrong. I wasn't special. I was just a man who had learned the hardest lesson imaginable and refused to forget it. I didn't save the neighborhood. The storm did. It stripped away all the pretense, the power trips, the rules written in ink but not in heart. It showed us who we really were and, more importantly, who we could be if we chose to listen, to prepare, and to open the door. especially for those who once tried to slam it shut. Because when the real wind blows, that's the only thing that matters. If you found this story as powerful as I did, please like this video and follow Winds of Thought for more tales of resilience.